Ethan Harrington was not a man easily interrupted. His mornings were carved into precise minutes, his schedule tight enough to suffocate anyone who dared to tamper with it. So when his assistant knocked hesitantly and whispered about a child waiting in the lobby claiming to attend her mother's interview, he frowned, not out of irritation, but out of curiosity. "Bring her up," he said simply, ignoring the assistant's raised brows. Minutes later, the elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and out stepped the girl. She looked so small against the vastness of his office, a space lined with towering bookshelves and walls of glass that framed the city skyline. But she didn't shrink back the way most adults did when they entered his presence. She clutched the folder in her arms and walked forward with the calmness of someone carrying an important duty. Ethan studied her silently, his sharp gray eyes narrowing just slightly. He was used to people fidgeting under his gaze, yet this child only blinked at him with quiet determination. She placed the folder on his desk, her small hand smoothing the edges before stepping back. "My mom was supposed to come today," she said, her voice a little shaky but brave. "She's sick, but she worked really hard for this. She told me not to let the chance slip away." For a moment, Ethan didn't answer. He opened the folder, expecting scribbles or childish drawings, but instead found a neatly prepared resume, cover letter, and pages of notes written in careful handwriting. There were even diagrams and sketches of ideas. He raised a brow, intrigued despite himself. "You're quite brave to come here," he finally said, his tone measured. "Do you even know what this job is about?" The girl nodded quickly, clasping her hands together. "It's about helping people make their homes better. My mom says she wants families to feel comfortable and safe. She knows what it's like not to have that, and she doesn't want others to feel the same way." Ethan leaned back in his leather chair, his curiosity deepening. Most adults rambled about profits, efficiency, and numbers when they sat across from him. Yet here was a child speaking about comfort, about families, about something that couldn't be measured on a chart. He rested his chin against his hand, watching her carefully. "And what about you? Why did you come instead of just staying home with her?" Her eyes softened, though her voice stayed steady. "Because I promised her, and because I wanted you to know how much this means to her. She never gives up, even when things are really hard. I thought maybe if you knew that, you'd understand." The office grew still, the hum of the city beyond the glass the only sound. Ethan felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. This wasn't just a child filling in for her mother, it was a reminder of something he thought he'd long forgotten. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan Harrington didn't feel like the most powerful person in the room. Ethan wasn't sure what possessed him to continue, but instead of sending the little girl away, he found himself asking her simple questions. He kept his tone light, half expecting her to stumble and retreat, but she didn't. She answered with honesty, sometimes fumbling for the right words, sometimes letting out a nervous laugh, yet never losing that determined look in her eyes. "What do you think makes someone good at their job?" he asked, curious to hear what her young mind would come up with. She thought for a moment, her brows furrowed in concentration. "Someone who doesn't give up when it gets hard," she said softly. "And someone who cares about the people they're helping. Mom says it's not just about money, it's about making people feel safe." Ethan leaned back, surprised by the weight of her answer. In boardrooms, executives threw around terms like productivity, market growth, and revenue. None of them ever mentioned care. Yet this child had said it as though it were the most obvious truth in the world. He tapped his pen against the desk. "And why do you think your mom should get this job?" The girl's gaze lifted to meet his directly, her small hands tightening in her lap. "Because she works harder than anyone I know. She raised me all by herself, and even when she's tired or sad, she still finds a way to smile. Every night she tells me that one day things will get better. I think this job is her, better." Her words struck something in him that he didn't expect. For a moment, the polished office with its glass walls and expensive furniture faded away, and Ethan was no longer the powerful CEO but a boy again, sitting in a tiny kitchen with peeling wallpaper. He remembered his own mother's tired eyes, her hands rough from work, her quiet voice telling him that they just had to hold on a little longer. She had been his anchor, his reason for everything. The girl's voice pulled him back. "I know I'm just a kid, and I don't understand everything. But I know my mom deserves a chance. She's the bravest person I know. Ethan cleared his throat, setting the pen down before she could notice the shift in his expression. He had spent years building walls around himself, keeping sentiment far away from business, yet somehow this child had managed to slip through. He studied her again, not just as a girl sitting in his office, but as proof of the strength behind the woman who had raised her. And he realized that sometimes resilience didn't shout, it spoke in soft voices, carried by those who had seen the hardest parts of life and still chose to hope. For the first time in years, Ethan Harrington felt his heart stir with something more than ambition, and he wasn't sure he wanted it to stop. The following morning, a thin envelope slipped through the mail slot of a modest apartment door. The little girl spotted it first as she padded across the living room floor, her school bag dangling from one shoulder. "Mom, there's a letter," she called, her voice carrying a mix of excitement and nervousness. Her mother, still pale from the fever that had kept her in bed, slowly sat up on the worn couch where she had been resting. With trembling fingers, she tore open the envelope, eyes scanning the first line. Her lips parted, and tears filled her eyes as she whispered, I got the job." The girl rushed to her side, peering eagerly at the page. Together, they read the formal words of congratulations from Harrington Enterprises, inviting her mother to begin work the following Monday. But at the bottom, scrawled in neat handwriting that didn't match the printed text, was a short note. "Your daughter reminded me of someone I once knew. She gave me more than just answers, she gave me hope. Get well soon. You've already passed the most important test, raising her." The mother pressed the paper to her chest, her tears spilling freely now. She looked at her daughter, who was grinning so wide her cheeks hurt, and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "You did this," she murmured against her hair. "You made this happen." "I just told him the truth," the girl said with a shrug, though her heart swelled with pride. Across the city, Ethan Harrington stood in his office, staring at the skyline that had once felt like the whole world to him. The morning sun reflected off the glass towers, casting golden light across his desk. For years, success had meant numbers, contracts, and control. But the little girl's voice still echoed in his mind, her simple words unraveling the coldness he had. Carefully built, she had reminded him of long-forgotten evenings when his own mother would whisper promises of a brighter tomorrow. He reached for the photo frame that always sat at the corner of his desk, the one of his late mother smiling despite the lines of exhaustion etched on her face. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to smile back. Later that evening, the girl and her mother shared a simple dinner of soup and bread, but it tasted better than any feast. Laughter replaced worry, and hope filled the small room like sunlight pushing through a window. The job meant stability, it meant a chance to breathe again, and most of all, it meant the future her mother had always promised was finally within reach. And somewhere high above the city, a man who had thought he had everything realized he had been missing something far more important, something a little girl had unknowingly returned to him with nothing more than her honesty. Because sometimes, the bravest voices come from the smallest messengers.